The cold, sterile white of the alien medical facility buzzed around First Sergeant Quinn Mackenzie as he limped into the room, a subtle ache in his bones accompanying each step. His uniform was torn in places, stained with both dirt and blood, most of it not his own. He'd been through worse, but this was a new level of strange. His commanding officer had somehow convinced the Korther, a race of highly intelligent, scientifically advanced aliens, to treat him in their medical facility after a particularly harrowing mission. The aliens didn't know much about human biology. To them, Mackenzie was a walking, breathing anomaly, an experiment waiting to happen. But after a violent battle with an aggressive alien faction on a hostile planet, Mackenzie had sustained injuries that left even the Korther medical staff speechless. Broken bones, torn muscles, and internal bleeding, things that, on any other planet, would have left someone bedridden or paralyzed. The Korther had been at first perplexed by the sheer nature of his survival. They studied his biology with intense curiosity and awe, watching his injuries heal at an astonishing rate. They called it superhuman regeneration, an enigma to them, but for Mackenzie, it was just another day as a Deathworlder. To his people, humans were known to survive against all odds. But the Korther had never seen anyone quite like him. First Sergeant Mackenzie, you are still walking? The question came from Dr. Skara, the lead Korther medic, her four multifaceted eyes blinking with confusion as she examined the readings on her holographic interface. Her sleek, insectoid form hovered near the medical bed where Mackenzie had been laid out moments earlier. He had been in for a full diagnostic scan, but the results were baffling even to them. Mackenzie leaned against the nearby counter, trying to keep his balance as he stood straight. That's what I do, he muttered with a grin, ignoring the dull throb in his side. I walk away from things that should have put me in a grave. Skara paused for a moment, studying the human in front of her. Despite the damage Mackenzie had sustained, he was already standing. It was a sight that defied logic for a species so advanced in their medical expertise. She had to admit, it was impressive. Still, her clinical mind was curious, almost obsessed with the biological anomaly in front of her. Your physiology. It's not possible, she murmured, tapping a few commands into the air. A second Korther, her assistant, was examining Mackenzie's blood and tissue samples, which only further confirmed the strange nature of his regeneration. The Korther had examined hundreds of species, but none had been like this. Humans were, in their eyes, little more than primitive creatures who had somehow outpaced their evolutionary expectations. Tell me, Sergeant Mackenzie, Skara continued, her voice heavy with scientific intrigue. How is it that you are still walking? These injuries would have rendered any other species, my species included, completely immobile. Mackenzie's expression softened as he straightened up from the counter and gave the medic a smile that barely concealed his exhaustion. You know, Doc, the same way you'd handle a little too much booze on a Saturday night. Keep walking and pretend it didn't happen. Skara tilted her head slightly, processing his words. It wasn't clear if she understood the analogy, but she didn't press further. Instead, she continued to scan Mackenzie's vitals with the intensity of someone determined to unlock the human mystery. Across the room, a third Korther, a scientist named Talak, joined the conversation. His legs were thin and segmented, like a praying mantis, and his movements were deliberate, his voice measured and calm. We've conducted multiple tests on your body, Mackenzie. Your cellular regeneration rate is off the charts. Your body is repairing itself faster than anything we've ever studied, including our own species' regenerative capabilities. Mackenzie rolled his shoulders, wincing slightly as his bones clicked into place. That sounds about right. My people aren't exactly what you'd call fragile. We tend to bounce back faster than most. Talak seemed intrigued but unconvinced. He pointed to a scan on the wall, highlighting the sections of Mackenzie's body that were still repairing. Your species' healing speed is unlike anything we've ever encountered. Yet we also see signs of something different. A cellular mutation, perhaps. Your genetic code seems to adapt to injuries as if it learns from them. Mackenzie raised an eyebrow, a small smirk playing at the corner of his lips. That's your theory, huh? Well, Doc, I've been shot, stabbed, and crushed more times than I can count. My body's figured out how to deal with it by now. Skara turned to Talak, her tone more serious now. Perhaps we're looking at an entirely new form of biological resilience. If we could understand it fully, it could revolutionize our approach to medicine. Your species could survive, no, thrive, under conditions that no other species would even survive. Mackenzie shook his head. I'm not some miracle worker document. I'm just a guy who doesn't give up when things get tough. You'd be surprised what the human body can do when it has to. The room grew quiet as Skara and Talok exchanged thoughts through silent gestures, trying to make sense of this odd creature before them. They had seen species far more advanced than humans, but none that could withstand the level of trauma Mackenzie had. It was, quite frankly, perplexing. How had this primitive species come to dominate so many worlds? And now, how had their physiology evolved in such a unique and baffling way? For Mackenzie, this wasn't about conquering challenges. It was just another day in the life of a Deathworlder. But to the Korther, his ability to survive in such extreme conditions was a puzzle, and one they were determined to solve. In their eyes, humans had no place surviving in such a dangerous galaxy. And yet here Mackenzie was, alive, unbroken, walking away from the worst injuries they had ever seen. What came next would challenge everything they knew about the universe and about humanity. The Korther medics could hardly contain their curiosity. They hovered around Mackenzie as if he were a rare specimen in a laboratory, exchanging confused glances as they studied every minute detail of his biology. But Mackenzie wasn't in the mood for their experiments. The constant beeping of the medical equipment and the sterile, unnerving atmosphere only reminded him of how far from home he was. "What's your point, Doc?" he muttered, shifting his weight to the other leg. His side was still sore, but it was nothing he couldn't walk off. He'd been through far worse, like that time on Icarus Station when half the crew was lost to an explosive decompression. But this was something new. The Korther, although brilliant in their own right, had never seen a creature like him before. Skara, the lead medic, pressed a few buttons on her holographic console, her expression serious as she studied the readings. "We still cannot understand it. Your regenerative capacity is unlike any species we have encountered. If we cannot figure out why you are healing so quickly, we risk missing vital data. Our healing techniques could benefit from such an anomaly." Her many eyes flicked toward Mackenzie, but there was something unsettling about the way she was observing him, as if he were more object than person. Mackenzie sighed, rubbing his hand over his neck, trying to stretch the stiffness from his shoulders. "I'm just trying to stay in one piece here. Not everything's a scientific breakthrough." Skara blinked several times, her antennae twitching with concentration. "Perhaps your people's ability to endure is rooted in your evolutionary history. You have adapted to live on a death world. Such harsh conditions could explain your remarkable resilience." Mackenzie chuckled, but there was no humor in his voice. "You're not wrong there. We've adapted because we had to. But that doesn't mean you can dissect me like a lab rat." He glanced at Talok, the Korther scientist who had been working on a separate set of scans. "I know I'm an anomaly to you guys, but that's what happens when you live on a planet where the local wildlife will try to kill you every chance it gets." Talok's voice was calm, but laced with intrigue. "We understand your world's danger, but your body's responses, they go beyond simple survival. You're not like any other Deathworlder we've encountered." Mackenzie met Talok's gaze. "Well, that's the thing about Earth. We don't just survive. We fight. Every single day." There was a brief pause. The room seemed to tighten around him, as if the very air was thick with questions that no one dared to voice. Even the medical team had fallen into a more thoughtful silence, their minds no doubt trying to digest the implications of what they were witnessing. Skara, however, was persistent. "We must investigate further. We are conducting tests to determine if your regenerative abilities are linked to your genetic code or if they're an evolutionary adaptation. Your people have survived where others would perish. This is of great interest to us." Mackenzie shot her a dry look. "I didn't sign up for a biology lesson document." "Nonetheless," she continued, ignoring his sarcasm, "we require more data. If we can replicate your regenerative process, it could save countless lives across the galaxy." Mackenzie felt a sinking sensation in his gut. He had fought for years to protect his people, to survive against enemies far stronger and more advanced than him. But now, he was something they wanted to study, to profit from. He wasn't just some soldier anymore. To them, he was a resource, a human weapon whose biology could be exploited for greater gain. As Skara fiddled with another set of readings, Mackenzie crossed his arms and leaned against the wall. You guys ever consider that maybe what you're looking for isn't something to be exploited? It's just the way we are. We didn't evolve to be perfect. We evolved to survive. The medic seemed taken aback by his response. But it is your perfection that makes you different. Your body can heal from almost anything. You've withstood injuries that would kill any other species. Maybe that's just luck, Mackenzie replied, though even he wasn't entirely convinced. His body had been through hell. He'd been stabbed, shot, beaten within an inch of his life more times than he cared to count. Yet somehow he kept going. Perhaps there was something to the way humans adapted to the most extreme conditions. But he wasn't about to let Skara and the others think he was some lab specimen. Your bodies are capable of rapid cellular regeneration, Talok added, his voice even more analytical. The Korthar have studied the biology of many species, but none have shown such an accelerated healing process. We cannot dismiss this as coincidence. Mackenzie sighed, glancing at the door. All right, fine. But just don't think you can take a sample of my blood and start injecting yourselves with it, or whatever you Korthar do when you're curious. Skara's mandibles clicked in a sound that might have been a laugh, though it was hard to tell. We would never do such a thing, Sergeant Mackenzie. But the fact remains, your body's ability to survive defies our understanding of biological systems. Mackenzie turned away from them, walking slowly toward the medical table and eyeing the equipment that lined the walls. I don't need to be your medical marvel. I just need to get back to my team. Talok stepped forward. Your injuries are not fully healed, Sergeant. You may leave when we are certain that your condition will not worsen. Mackenzie shot a pointed look at the Korthar. I'm already fine. Better than fine. I'll leave when I'm good and ready. There was a brief silence, and then Skara, her voice almost softer now, spoke again. We do not understand how your body functions the way it does. But perhaps we have been too focused on the anomaly. Maybe it is time we learn from you. The way you survive, the way you endure. There is much we can learn, Sergeant Mackenzie. Not just about your biology, but about the nature of your species. For a moment, Mackenzie's guard lowered, just a fraction. You want to know about humanity? About us? It's not just about healing or surviving. It's about fighting for each other. We never back down. We may not be the smartest or the strongest, but when we face the worst, we adapt. We keep pushing forward. The Korthar stared at him, no doubt processing the enormity of his words. Perhaps they didn't understand completely, but they were beginning to. Mackenzie turned back to face them, his expression hardening again. So, Doc, if you want to study humanity, try something new. Don't look at just the bones, the blood, the scans. Look at what makes us keep getting back up, even when everything's against us. Skara's many eyes met his, and for the first time, there was something almost like respect there. Perhaps you are right. For the first time, Mackenzie allowed himself to smile. Maybe they hadn't figured him out yet, but he was certain of one thing. No matter how much they studied, they'd never fully understand humans. And that, he thought, was humanity's greatest advantage.